Lesson 8, discipline and encouragement. My plan, and I've sort of messed around with the schedule today to try to get it to all work out, but my plan is probably to do this lesson today and Sunday, and then combine the two lessons on character traits of successful families based upon families in the Bible. And then there was a thing at the end, like the Cultural Sunday. I think Cultural Sunday I'm going to spend on how culture has affected the family. So we're going to stick with the topic of that. And so I think it'll be helpful as we go through, and we won't have something totally disconnected to the class. Let's go ahead and bow for a word of prayer. Hey, John, will you say a prayer for us, that you have a microphone? Yeah.
Father in heaven, we come before you, Father, this evening, and we give you thanks and praise and honor for all things. And we especially thank you for the blessings that we have through your Son and that shed blood that we have and the hope of heaven that we have. But we're thankful this evening, Father, that we can come together as one big family and that we can encourage one another, lift one another up. And as we continue our walk, and we ask you to be with Dwayne as he prepared this lesson to lift our spirits up. And we ask that you look into our hearts and rebuild our hearts to be more like your Son, to be more graceful, compassionate and loving, Father. And we thank you for all these things, and be with us always. And we offer up this prayer in your Son's name. Amen.
Amen. So today we're going to talk about discipline and encouragement and training. It sort of all goes into the same idea of what we're talking about. So sometimes when we think of discipline, we think only of corporal punishment, or we think of grounding, or we think of things like that. But it's really, discipline in the Bible is more of a training. And sometimes it does require what we would normally refer to as discipline. So the Bible talks quite a bit about that, and it's a very important topic for us to discuss as we go through this lesson. I'm going to count on you to share some of your wisdom and insight and how you've applied the scriptures to this topic through the years, what has worked successfully, what has not worked, even give you a chance to maybe talk about the kind of discipline you received when you were a child and how that has sort of changed through the years. Our main passage is going to be in Hebrews chapter 12 as we start out. Hebrews chapter 12. But I think we need to talk about this first. First, we need to understand that biblical discipline is not the same as punishment. Punishment is about making someone pay, really, for what they've done. They've done something wrong. Now they have to pay for what they did that was wrong. Where discipline maybe is a bigger umbrella, and it has the goal of training and teaching people to do what is right. So discipline or punishment is a part of discipline, but not all discipline is punishment. Does that make sense? Punishment is discipline, but not all discipline is punishment. And so I think that's an important part of what we want to talk about today. So Hebrews chapter 12, let's go ahead and read that passage. Hebrews chapter 12, we'll read verses 5 through 11. Hebrews 12, 5 through 11. You have forgotten the exhortation which speaks to you as to sons. My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens, and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endured chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed for a few days chasten us as seems best to them, but he for our profit, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now no chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. Nevertheless, afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. So let's just spend a few minutes before we get into disciplining and training children to look at the point of this particular passage. If you have anything that you want to talk about, what is the point of this passage? It's not really about disciplining children. What is the point, and what should we get out of this first before we go into the disciplining children? Anybody? Savannah has something?
It's not about making them suffer for what they've done wrong, but making them learn.
Okay, it's definitely about making them learn. But who is this actually written to? Who needs to learn from this passage? Our kids, our little kids in these classes beside us here? Parents? Christians in general, right? Because he's talking about, hey, God disciplines. God trains. And if God disciplines and God trains as our perfectly our Heavenly Father, we should take that as sort of our model on how we train in discipline. And the purpose of our training in discipline should be the same purpose as God's training in discipline. So all of us have experienced God's discipline. It could come in different formats, in different ways, but I know there have been times in my life where at the time I knew I was probably being chastened by the Lord, and sometimes looking back at it, just like providence, sometimes looking back at something is when you can finally realize God's providence was in that the whole time. Joseph's a great example of that. I don't know that Joseph knew all along this was God's great plan to save the people. He realized it later, and then he could look back at his life and say, whoa, God was working all through that to make it work out the way it was supposed to. And I think God's discipline sometimes works the same way. In the moment, we just know that we're in a lot of pain, we're suffering, whatever the case may be, and we may not always recognize it in the moment. Now, just like providence, it is helpful if you can recognize it in the moment. It gives you a lot more faith. It gives you a lot more ability to endure that because you know it's coming from the Lord, and you know what the Lord wants you to do in order for that to stop, and you know that the Lord is merciful and gracious, and He doesn't want to punish us for doing bad things. He wants us to do good things, and that's what we'll learn as we go through here. Anything else about just us learning from the chastening of the Lord? Phil has something, and then Tim has something. Go ahead, Phil.
In the context, chapter 12, verse 3 and following, he's talking about people fighting against sin, resisting sin. So the issue of all this, God understands that the greatest problem we face is resisting sin successfully and learning how to not get trapped in it. So that's sort of what we do with our kids. We try to show them the road to go down and hope they pick the right one. But God knows which way we're going to turn. And He's got a plan for that. So He'll take care of that. But if we stay, back in Exodus 20 when He gave the commandments, the people were so scared of His voice, said they didn't want to even hear it. And that fear of the Lord was actually put in place, not to push them away from God, but He said it's to teach them not to sin, to resist against it.
Very good. Let me ask you this question. If you're sinning, would you want God to do something to help you stop sinning? To wake you up the fact that you're sinning, even if it's painful? Everybody on board with that? I think we would all want that. And we would all want Him to make us suffer the consequences of what we're doing. So we're like, that hurts. That causes a lot of pain. I'm going to stop doing the thing that causes me pain. So I think God chastening us, sometimes it's not pleasant at the time, like He's going to talk about here, but it's necessary for us. Tim?
The motivator here for the one doing the discipline is love.
Okay.
So just want to, I think that has to carry over when we discipline as well.
Sure. Which is the first thing here. So discipline is an expression of love. So that's in the outline. So discipline is an expression of love. It says, whom the Lord loves, He chastens. Discipline proves you belong to the family. Yeah, I can say I have never spanked anyone else's kids. I've never disciplined anyone else's kids in any way, shape, or form. Maybe stern talking or, hey, stop that, run, quit running, something like that, but that's it. Not even my sister's kids. The thought of that would never enter my mind to do something like that. Because they're not really, in a sense, I'm not responsible for them. They're not my family. Even though my niece and nephew were, but it's different, right? So it says that you belong to the one disciplining you. It is their responsibility. So when the Lord chastens us, that says we belong to Him. And that's if we discipline our children, however that is, that says to our children, you're mine. You're my responsibility, and I care for you. I love you. That's why I'm doing this. Discipline isn't pleasant at the moment. As a matter of fact, the text says it's painful. Discipline has a purpose. In the text, verses 10 through 11, it is to produce holiness and righteousness. Sort of what Phil was talking about. It's to help us, it's shape our character and help us stop doing the sinful things that we have a tendency of wanting to do and come back to living a holy life and being more like God. That was the purpose of his discipline. So it would make sense that that would be the purpose of our discipline, is to get our kids to live holy and righteous lives. And then discipline is training. It shapes us over time. Discipline doesn't happen all at once. Even maybe bad attitudes and bad thought processes aren't corrected like that. They're corrected over a period of time as this training continues to go on. And that happens to us, and that happens to our children as well. So any thoughts about this now as it relates to us and our parenting? Mary has something.
Well, it helped me learn self-control and applying myself. And I know, I remember being punished for lying and then feeling forgiven. It gave me a feeling of forgiveness when my mom, told me that she loved me. I've done this thing, but she still, she expressed love after disciplining me. So I knew what forgiveness felt like.
Yeah, very good. So discipline, part of discipline is restoration or restoring the relationship if it's been broken. So you learn through how your mom disciplined you and still loved you, that's a preview of how God loves us when we sin. And I know a lot of times, at times, our kids can frustrate us as they're growing up. They can frustrate us. They can sometimes try us. You're trying to get certain principles in their heads, and they're having a hard time learning that. But we try God too, and God shows us how that is. And our kids need to know, no matter what we're doing it because we do love them, and we're trying to help them see God's way and do things God's way. That's got to be ever before us at all times. Anything else about the Hebrews 13 passage or 12 passage before we move on? Well, the Bible has a lot of passages here, and hopefully you had a chance to read all of these that talk about, according to Scripture, discipline does a lot of things. First of all, it produces wisdom. That's Proverbs 29 and verse 15. The rod and rebuke give wisdom. So there's two sides to it. There's maybe the physical corporal punishment, but there's also the talking, the rebuke, the words that go along with that. They go together in making training up your children. It protects them from harm. Proverbs 23, 13 through 14. It removes foolishness. So that's what Proverbs 22:15 says. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of correction will drive it far from him. It teaches obedience. Jesus had to learn obedience. It brings delight and peace. Proverbs 29:17 says, correct your son, and he will give you rest. Yes, he will give delight to your soul. What would be the opposite of that if you don't discipline your child? What's he going to give you? Peace and rest? Constant turmoil. Constant turmoil. And it will last for a long, long time. So that's why it's important that we start disciplining and training at a very early age. And if we don't discipline and train at an early age, then we're going to suffer, and they're going to suffer. And it's just, everybody that's around them is going to suffer if we're not careful. All right, so this brings us to question number one. I think I have a few more things on question number one that I have in your outline. I thought it would be interesting for us to discuss some of these things. Thinking back on your own childhood, can you identify ways that discipline actually benefited you? Mary's already given us one of those. I think Brenda gave us one last on Sunday with not telling the truth, or no, stealing something, and that being dealt with. Carol has one. How many of you, as a child, were spanked? Anybody? Okay, several of us. How many of you? This is going to be curious. I'm curious to know the answer to this. How many of you wish you had never been spanked? Looking back at it now, at your age, looking back and saying, you know what? I wish I had never been spanked. All right, you guys wish you had never been spanked? All right. So most of us, what do you see? What do you see? Why do you wish you had never been spanked? I don't want to put you guys on the spot too much, but I'll ask you too. Why are you glad you were spanked as a child? It's coming to you. And then I'll be at you, Carol. Sorry.
My dad was a strict disciplinarian. He was also a principal at school, so he would deal with kids at school. And my parents always said, my dad always told me, he said, son, if you get in trouble at school, when you get home,
oh yeah,
you're going to get more. It was not done yet. But what my dad would do is he'd give me the talk before he gave me the discipline or the punishment, whatever you want to call it. And that hurt me more than the spanking, because my dad revealed his tender heart towards me, and he used to say, this is going to hurt me more than you. And I didn't understand that as a kid.
You didn't believe it either.
I didn't believe it. But once I had kids, I realized what he meant. And that's what was good about the discipline. My dad was not afraid to tell me, yes, son, I don't want to do this. I love you, and I'm doing it because of that. But I said, but what I heard was, I've just disappointed you again. That's what I heard. And I didn't understand, because I was too young to understand that. And it made me want to try harder. But, you know, we all have to work through that, you know.
All right. Carol,
Yeah.
back to the original question.
Oh, okay. I got spanked as a kid. My mom used to use that paddle. You know those little paddles that had the rubber band and the ball? And you used to go like that. Well, it didn't have the rubber band and the ball on it anymore. But all 5 of us had written all over that paddle. We all signed it and made little funny things on it. But when I was about 8, my dad had a BB gun out in the shed, and I remember standing there holding it and showing it to one of my friends, probably like this, when my mother pulled up and had a cow. And she said, go to your room right now until your father gets home. And so you knew you were in trouble when you had to wait for your father to get home. So I went to my room, and it seemed like it was 4 or 5 hours I was in there, but I wrote 100 times, I will never point a gun at anyone ever again in my life. I wrote it literally 100 times. My dad came in, and I was so scared. And he just sat down, and he put his arms around me, and he hugged me, and he said, I think you've learned your lesson. It's going to be okay.
Good. Anybody else experience growing up where you were disciplined in a way that has left an impression on you? All right, Daniel has one.
All right, so I have a lot of, like Phil and like Carol, I was also sent to my room, and I remember those days of I was the only boy, so I knew exactly what was going to come to me, and I probably deserved it 100%. So I remember strapping on extra underwear and trying to divert it, and it's funny because I got the same exact message from my dad. He always sat down, and he always looked at me, and he always explained why he was doing this, and he always said, "This is hurting me more than it hurts you." Of course, as a kid, you don't understand that because you're about to get your butt whooped. But as an adult now and as a father, I understand the message that he was sending me and the importance of it. So I can look back now and I go, I deserved it and I learned from it. Okay. So it was accomplished.
All right. So you were disciplined in a way that brought about the righteousness that he was talking about. You learned your lesson. All right. It wasn't abusive. You know, we probably need to realize that some corporal punishment can be abusive, no question about it. And everybody has to make up their own rules and deal with that the way that they feel is appropriate. I would simply say the Bible does talk about sparing the rod and just using punishment like that. So we did with our children. We had a little thing called a wisdom worker. It was made out of a recycled tire. And the thing I liked about that is you did not have to swing hard. So sometimes when you're swinging hard, trying to hurt it, trying to show them that this is painful, you're losing control. I mean, you feel like you're out of anger doing this. Well, this thing was just pop, and it would really hurt. I know that my parents, their number one form of discipline as far as corporal punishment was switches. Switches. You don't have to move a switch very hard before it gets your attention. My mom had one in the rack, the songbook rack, and every time I started misbehaving, she'd just pull my pants leg up a little bit, and that would be enough to get me to behave. All right, who has it? Mike, I think, do you have it over there? You rescinded? Who has it? Emery has it.
So growing up, I have an older brother. And my dad had citrus trees in the backyard, and he had a grapefruit tree that was his favorite. One of us, of the brothers, took a saw and sawed some of the bark off the side of the grapefruit tree just to see what the saw would do. Dad came home, found it, was very upset. Neither of the brothers fessed up to it. So both brothers got spanked. Dad used a belt. We were in that type of discipline for that kind of action. So the lesson I learned was be responsible for your decisions in life.
Okay. All right.
Because you're going to affect somebody else.
Yeah, for sure. And that was one of those things that, it might. Sometimes you do have to walk something back. Like I said last time, if you overstate something, then it's fine to walk it back and say, you know what, I said I was going to do this in discipline, but I overstated that. I apologize for that, but this is the discipline we're going to get. So I think it's okay if nobody admits it to spank both of them, I guess. I would really want to find out who did it before I spank both of them, but that's the decision you have to make. Alexa.
My father was extremely serious about lying, and I think my brother and I only tried that once and never again. But when you read the verses in the Bible about how much God hates liars, I feel like looking back on how angry he got with even the idea of the chance that we could have lied about something was a very righteous way of discipline, and I don't even remember if we got spanked over it because his anger was so intense that we respected just that, and it was a pivotal feeling for me, and I really appreciate that he took that seriously.
Okay, very good. So some parents say the biggest thing you should discipline for, I think Mike has his hand up now, is lying. That's on the top of the list. Is if a kid lies, that deserves a level of discipline maybe that others don't deserve, because what's the goal? Is the goal only changing behavior? No, the goal is changing the heart, right? So Alexa says that changed her heart to some degree. That idea, and that's what her dad wanted. Mike.
Everybody has such nice beaver cleaver, stories, but the reality is, what I remember about my dad the most being disciplined was I was driving home one day, learning how to shift gears, and I grinded the gears, and he backhanded me in the car. Okay, so it was just a bad day for him, and he just backhanded me. I remembered that 50-some years later. So with my kids, with Emily especially, I remember losing my temper with her, and I was just so mad, hitting her, spanking her.
Yes.
that it felt good. And it was out of anger. Just like my dad had done to me, I was doing to her, and that's wrong. So
Without question.
But you have to watch yourself. When you're mad,
yes,
you have to really watch yourself, because I bet every parent in here has probably lost it with their kid and maybe done something like that. But they'll remember that forever.
Yeah. Yes, that is definitely true. Just a rule that we didn't do any slapping. That's just, we didn't do any slapping on the face, anything like that. That was, to us, that was sort of crossing a line of no longer discipline. It is more out of anger. And there's lots of ways to solve that issue. It's the cooling off period, right? You don't spank right away if you're going to spank. If you're going to spank, you don't spank right away. You send them to the room, let them think about it, what they did. Sometimes that's the worst punishment ever, right? The anticipation, wait till your dad gets home. That anticipation sometimes is worse than the actual punishment. And so, and then it gives you a chance to cool off. It gives you a chance to talk to your spouse and say, all right, what is an appropriate punishment for what so-and-so did? Does that make sense? So there's definitely, there was a preacher one time, and I think I know who this preacher was, but I don't want to say it because I'm not 100% sure. He gave a lesson one time, and it was the rod of correction, and he brought a duffel bag. And in the duffel bag, he had a whole bunch of things, and he would say, either this is an acceptable rod of correction, or this isn't an acceptable rod of correction. And one was a baseball bat. A baseball bat is definitely not an acceptable rod of correction. A switch, I feel like it was probably an acceptable form of discipline. When my parents used to switch on me, and most of the time, if not all the time, I deserved it, and it benefited from it. And it wasn't done. Now, yeah. Was my dad frustrated sometimes? Yes. And I teased my dad even to the very end about this. We had a cherry tree out front. Didn't produce edible cherries, I don't think, but anyway. And we had a bay window. I mean, it covered a huge portion of our front room. And he would always send us out to get the switch first. And my switch was never big enough. And when I would come in, then he would go out to get the switch. And I tell you, I teased him. I said he'd get the chainsaw out of the garage, but he really didn't. But he would get his pocket knife out, and he'd go and he would reach up there and he would cut this big old switch off, and then he would dwindle it down on the way in. So on the way in, you see all these little bitty branches falling on the side before he got in. But that was, I think, an appropriate part of discipline. So yes, some things are inappropriate, some things are abusive. And I think there's one of our questions is how do you, it might not be this one, but how do you recognize or know when something crosses the line from being acceptable discipline that fits according to what the Bible says about discipline, and when it becomes abusive? I think the anger is a key factor there. I think if you are angry and you're doing it to alleviate your anger or to make yourself feel better somehow, then you've crossed the line in disciplining your child. You've done something that you shouldn't have done. All right, so I think that's one aspect of it. All right, anybody else? All right, we have Savannah up here. You have to wait for a microphone. And we have these other questions up here. How do you want your children to discipline your grandchildren differently than how you discipline them? So start thinking about that. Hopefully you have something there, or the same, maybe the same. You want exactly the same, or is there something that you think you could improve on, the next generation can improve on? Savannah?
So you mentioned the cooling off period, which I think is very interesting, but at a young age, you can't really have a cooling off period, right? Because I can't send my 2-year-old to his room and say, go think about what you did. If I let him go like 5 steps, he's totally forgotten what he did wrong. Like he just poured water all over the floor and he's giggling. And then I'm like, go to your room. And then I calm down. And I go in there and he's like, yes. And he doesn't even remember what happened. So what period of time does that happen? Are they able to understand?
Okay, anybody have a comment on that? So she's saying that some kids young might need immediate discipline because they can't process. It's sort of like, Shelly's always on me for this. I put the dog in his crate, and it's like 10 minutes. She said, let him out. I was like, no, he's in trouble. He forgot about that. He doesn't know he's in trouble anymore. I was like, I don't know. He's pretty smart. He should know. I'll just go by and remind him every few minutes he's in trouble. You're a bad dog. But there is a sense in which different ages are going to change on that. So we have a couple. We have Randy and then John.
Yeah, I hear what she's saying, and there's a lot of truth to that. And working on a master's in counseling, one thing you learn is that in most cases, the consequence has to be almost immediate to be effective. Now with a teenager, yeah, you can do you need to think about it, but in a sense, the consequence has already started because you've come down on them and said, you need to go think about it. But for especially younger kids, this needs to be pretty immediate.
Yeah,
because their memory is so short anyway.
Yeah, I'm not saying 3 days. I'm saying 3 to 5, 10, 15 minutes maybe. And the whole point is to get yourself to a position where you can discipline the way God would discipline. So if it's immediate, if you can do that immediately, then that's fine too. But I'm saying we're trying to deal with Mike's issue there about sometimes it can become unacceptable before God the way that you discipline. And so one of those is anger. So if it takes you an hour to calm down from your anger, that says something about you need to be disciplined, right? By God. You need to tell God, discipline me because I can't deal with the anger that's happening. And then maybe God will help you with that. But usually it could, and I don't think it's an every occurrence thing, as I think Mike was saying. We all have those moments. It is not consistent with us. It's just whether it was a bad day or whether it was just a pile up of a whole bunch of things happening, that we have to stop for a second and say, am I doing this because I had a bad day? Am I doing this because somebody else did something to me? Or is this a measured response that goes along evenly with what this child just did? Because if it's not a measured response that correlates to what the child did, and it's because we had a bad day or because we were angry, then I think we've crossed a line that God doesn't want us to cross. I mean, God gets angry too, but He's perfect. We're not. All right, John's first and then Tim.
Okay, well, we don't spank our daughters anymore because I think they're older and that's weird to spank them. But when I did spank them, I never said, as my dad told me, this hurts me more than hurts you. I left that part out because it actually felt good to give them a spanking. So I never said that to my kids. And
well, one of them you just look at. You don't have to spank.
Right, but I wanted to add that because I heard a couple people say this hurts me more than it hurts you. I actually felt good when I gave them spankings, so I never said that.
Okay, all right.
I'll add something. We communicate with our kids and explain. So I feel like after you spank and before you spank, like they get to explain,
Sure.
what happened, and then you explain. And but yeah, we don't really spank them anymore.
Yeah, there is, somewhere in here, there's that discipline needs to be age appropriate. So most of us probably stopped spanking our children at some point. And it wasn't effective anymore, and it wasn't something that, was maybe acceptable, wasn't good. So I bet you, I don't know that I have a firm memory on this. Shelley might be able to clear me up on this. But we probably stopped spanking the girls a little earlier, but probably early teens maybe is when we probably stopped spanking altogether. I don't remember exactly. Maybe the kids would probably say they got spanked at 25. I don't know. All right, Tim.
I'm going to try to do this quickly. I'll just tell you what we did. We talked about this before we had children, how we were going to discipline them. And we decided we were just going to trust what God said on the matter. And so the discipline, if it's not out of love, it's not being done right. And I think you've addressed that. Mm-hmm. The other part of it is that you discipline a child not because you're angry or they're clumsy or any of those things. You discipline a child because they're rebelling. And so when you have a young child that spills their milk, that's an accident. Whenever you have a child that does it again and laughs about it, they're starting to rebel. And the reason why you discipline your child is because you don't want them to rebel against God.
Right.
And that's the whole thing. All right, so we used a rod. So we had to figure out what was a rod going to be.
Right.
It's kind of like what you said. And I think it's like a switch, most likely. What we ended up with, I like that because you can test it on yourself, and
Right, yep.
and that's the beauty of it,
Yep.
because you have different sized children, and it's got to be appropriate. The other thing that I want to say is that if you discipline a child when they're young, it's a very short period of time. Discipline doesn't go; it naturally stops. What I'm hearing, I don't spank my girls anymore. Well, that's because if you were disciplining early, it's going to work early. If it's done half-hearted and inconsistent, it's not going to go well for you. The other part is that the Proverbs, they're not guarantees. I had a child that took discipline a lot different than the other two. And just take all that for what it is. It's wisdom, and it works in general, but not every form of discipline works the same. And you gotta take all that in.
Yeah, I think you do start with what God says. The Proverbs do talk about disciplining corporal punishment with a rod, and judging what that rod is what you need to do, and use wisdom, and decide. Definitely, the younger you start, the better. Obviously, there's judgment in that, right? There's a big time judgment. But if you leave a child to their own ways until they get to be 8, 9, 10 years old, you've lost. I mean, you have lost. And that's going to be, as we talked about earlier, that's going to be a lot of pain for them and everybody around them, and it's going to be a lot of pain for you, and it's going to be a lot of pain for God. So you don't want to do that. And I like your point that if discipline works, if you do it effectively and consistently and it works, there is a time where discipline changes or hopefully stops altogether. At some point, you don't have to discipline anymore, because I was telling somebody this, that if you don't learn self-discipline, somebody else is going to be disciplining you the rest of your life. All right, so it's not going to be, it might not be obviously a parent, but it's going to be your boss, it's going to be somebody is going to be disciplining you if you don't learn to discipline yourself. So eventually a child learns self-discipline. And so they learn, this isn't what I'm supposed to do because I've been trained, and so I'm not going to do that. And this is what I'm supposed to do, so I'm going to do that. So they learn as they go along. But just like us, I mean, how many of you are fully beyond the Lord's discipline? You can say, hey, Lord, you can stop now. I've learned all my lessons. I don't need your discipline anymore. I don't think so. So even as they get in their teenage years, another form of discipline, taking away privileges or, whatever you decide, you guys decide. We all are able to make those decisions for our own children and what we think is best together. But it is good, I think, to look at the collective wisdom of this group, especially from those who have raised successful Christian people who are self-disciplined. I think it's good to listen to those kind of instructions. If we turn our eyes to that kind of counsel, we're probably pretty foolish. Carrie Ann.
So I think that thinking about how the Lord disciplines us is helpful because, I believe that the way that He corrects a new Christian is different than the way that He corrects, a more veteran Christian, if you will, someone that knows more. Is obviously the rules are the same, but how He treats us and meets us where we're at and gives us what we need to stay on the right track, I think is helpful. I know for me, my mom was the main disciplinarian because when my parents got married, my dad was in the Navy, he was gone a lot. And so she started out with discipline, and that's kind of how it went. But one day when I was in high school, I had done something really ridiculous.
And she had just had surgery and was laid up in bed. And so I remember her kind of yelling at me from the bed and saying, "You're lucky, I'm bedridden, go see your father." And that was the one time I can remember my dad actually disciplining me, and I was expecting the beating of a lifetime. And he gave me a 30-minute lecture, and I bawled my eyes out, and that was it. And he sent me into my room, and that was it. And I will never forget that conversation. And so I think the relationship that we individually have with our children should dictate how we individually discipline them. Not saying that the rules are different. The rules need to be consistent, obviously, throughout the household. But you may have a different relationship with your children, and so that's helpful. Also, I think I was 16 with my last spanking. Right. That says a lot more about me than my parents, though.
Mary, we're going to have to start with you on Sunday. All right, put a marker there, highlight what you were going to say, and we'll start with her. One of the things I think it continues to go in this: treating everyone the same by definition is unfair. So disciplining every child the same is unfair to some of your children, probably. So some children can learn from a look. Some children can learn just from a good lecture or talking to. Some kids learn just by seeing that they hurt you, and that hurts them. And so you wouldn't need to have the same form of discipline on every child. Are your children going to claim that's not fair? Probably, but you're the grown-up. And so explain to them treating everyone the same by definition is unfair. And maybe they will learn eventually that you did that because that's what they needed at the moment, according to the best that you could figure out. Hey, we're gonna finish up this lesson on Sunday.